All right, let's get to it.
Make sure your box is oriented so that the lid and the box are matching and the edges where your hinges are going to go are lined up. Then fold the hinges backwards on themselves and set them on the edge of your box and put them in about the position you think they should go. Using a marking gauge, set the depth to the first spot where your hinge plate is going to go. Making sure to keep the fence of the marking gauge tight against the side of your box, score a line for the first position of the hinge mortise all the way around on both sides of the box and on both sides of the lid. Now line your hinge up to the first mark you just made and readjust your marking gauge to the opposite side of the hinge. And go ahead and make 4 more marks to define a hinge mortise boundary on the opposite side of your hinge. Make sure now that when we're chiseling out our hinge mortises, locate the flat back side of the chisel away from where the hinge mortise is. We're going to use the mallet and tap down to define the boundary of the hinge mortise. Flip our chisel around so that the flat back side of the chisel again points away from our mortise. This will ensure a nice square hinge mortise. Now using a super sharp chisel, make sure that we're using good pressure on the edge of the chisel and take a very thin shaving, gently working up to your boundary line. If you find the chisel's going too deep because of the angle, try flipping your chisel upside down. Feel free to come back and redefine your hinge mortise boundaries at any time. Also, the depth of your hinge mortise should be just slightly deeper than the thickness of the hinge plate. Now you can test fit your hinge. Make sure it fits nice and tight in the mortise. Now line your hinge up in the mortise that you just made, and using a scratch awl or a center punch, mark a little hole right in the dead center of the mounting hole for your hinge. If these aren't in the center, when you install your screw, it's going to push your hinge out of position. So be precise with this. Now we're going to pre-drill the holes for our number 2 screws that are going to mount these hinges. Main point here to note is to keep the drill extremely rigid and straight up and down. If the drill flops around, the little drill bit is going to break. Drill all the way down till you hit the tape depth stop or until your hole is roughly 1/2 inch deep. From the organizer bin on the wall, grab the number 2 brass screws and the matching slotted screwdriver. Once you get it started, use some decent downward pressure so that the screwdriver tip doesn't slip out of the slot on the screw. Remember, these are brass screws, so they're soft. Tighten these screws up just enough to keep the hinge tight on the box. If you put too much torque on these screws, the little brass head snaps right off. Now, if done correctly, your hinge plate should sit just slightly below flush of the box edge. And that's it. Congratulations on installing your first hinge.